Reading books early in the morning with Adam B. Levine.
Hi, my name is Adam B. Levine. I'm the editor-in-chief of LTBcoin.com and a disruptive technology enthusiast. Recently, I've been looking at the BitLicense work coming out of New York, and it's been striking me as strangely familiar. It's a little strange, but I think that we've heard this story before. And actually, recently I was reading a book. I've got it right here. It's called The Master Switch by Tim Wu. The subtitle of it is The Rise and Fall of Information Empires. And it's interesting because the internet really has enabled us to think about information in a completely different way, and Bitcoin has added a finance layer on top of what was a good communications layer before. So this is not my book. I did not write this book. But when I went looking for this story, other places than this book, I could not find it, and it was a little surprising to me. So I want to take the opportunity here to just read a few select chapters out of this book, The Master Switch by Tim Wu, that specifically deal with AM radio and FM radio and essentially the story of those two technologies. Today I'm going to read the first section about it. This will be a multi-part recording. And so here we go. The Master Switch by Tim Wu. Chapter 2, Radio Dreams. One July afternoon in 1921, J. Andrew White paused before speaking the words that would make him the first sportscaster in history. White, an amateur boxing fan who worked for the Radio Corporation of America, stood ringside in Jersey City, surrounded by more than 90,000 spectators. The boxing ring was but a tiny white square in a teeming sea of humanity. Everyone was waiting for the fight of the century to begin. In the ring, the fighters looked mismatched. The larger was Jack Dempsey, the Manessa Mauler, the reigning heavyweight champion who had grown wildly unpopular for refusing to serve in World War I. George Carpenter, his opponent, had entered the ring to strains of La Marseillaise and deafening cheers. The French war hero was obviously the crowd favorite. In White's hands was something unexpected, a telephone. It was fitted with an extremely long wire that ran out of the station and all the way to Hoboken, New Jersey to a giant radio transmitter. To that transmitter was attached a giant antenna some 600 feet long, strung between a clock tower and a nearby building. The telephone White was holding served as the microphone, and the rickety apparatus to which it was connected would, with a bit of luck, broadcast the fight to hundreds of thousands of listeners packed for the day into radio halls in 61 cities. What was planned now sounds quite ordinary, but at the time it was revolutionary, using the technology of radio to reach a mass audience. Today we take it for granted that TV or radio audiences for some performances or sporting events is larger than the live audience, but before 1921 such a situation had never actually occurred. This fight, in fact, would mark the first time that more people had experienced an event remotely than locally, that is, if everything went according to plan. The idea to broadcast the fight came from a young man named Julius Hopp, manager of concerts for Madison Square Gardens as well as an amateur radio enthusiast. He wanted to experiment with an application of radio technology that previously only hobbyists had played with, something called radio broadcasting. Hopp couldn't do it alone. He had found important backing, financial and technical, at the Radio Company of America, RCA, predominantly a military contractor, including its vice president, Andrew White, and, more importantly, David Sarnoff, an ambitious young executive and enigmatic personality who would figure centrally in the history of radio. A Russian Jew who had immigrated as a youth, Sarnoff had an eye for promising ideas coupled with a less admirable tendency to claim them as his own. Having managed to funnel several $1,000s of RCA money to Hopp, he and White focused their combined energies on the Dempsey broadcast. The scale of the effort was unprecedented, but to be absolutely clear, Sarnoff, White, and Hopp were in no sense inventing radio broadcasting. They were, rather, trying to bring to the mainstream an idea that amateurs had been fiddling with for years. Just as email had been around since the late 1960s, though reaching the general public only in the 1990s, broadcasting in some form had been occurring since as early as 1912, and perhaps even earlier. It was amateurs, some of them teenagers, who pioneered broadcasting. They operated rudimentary radio stations, listening into radio signals from ships at sea, chatting with fellow amateurs. They began to use the word broadcast, which in contemporary dictionaries was defined as a seeding technique, quote, cast or dispersed in all directions, as seeds from the hand in sowing, widely diffused, end quote. The hobbyist imagined that radio, which had primarily existed as a means for two-way communication, could be applied to a more social form of networking, as we might say today. And the amateur needed no special equipment. It was enough to simply buy a standard radio kit. As the Book of Wireless, published in 1916, explains, quote, any boy can own a real wireless station if he really wants to, end quote. If the amateur pioneers had a leader, it was the inventor Lee DeForest, who by 1916 was running his own radio station, 2XG, in the Bronx. He broadcast the results of the 1916 presidential election and also music and talk for an hour or so each day. QST Magazine, the publication of the American Radio Relay League, reported in 1919 of DeForest's station, quote, "We feel it conservative to estimate that our nightly audience is in excess of 1,000 people," end quote. Back in Jersey City, as the bout is about to begin, Dempsey runs at Carpenter, punching hard. And while Carpenter puts up a spirited fight, the larger Dempsey clearly dominates. In the second round, Carpenter breaks his thumb, yet fights on. By round 4, Dempsey is insuperable, landing blows to the body and head seemingly at will, as the Frenchman stoops forward, barely able to stand.
Carpenter is in trouble. Dempsey still belting away to the stomach. And down goes Carpentier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's up just in time. And Dempsey goes after him, and down he is again. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's trying to get up. 8, 9, 10, and out. And Jack Dempsey remains heavyweight champion of the world.
The broadcasters were in fact lucky that it was over in just 4 rounds, for soon after, their equipment actually exploded. Still, it held together long enough for more than 300,000 listeners to hear the fight in the radio halls. As Wireless Age put it, instantly, through the ears of an expectant public, a world event had been pictured in all its thrilling detail. A daring idea had become fact. What's so interesting about the Dempsey broadcast is that it revealed an emerging medium as essentially up for grabs. It was one of those moments when an amateur or hobbyist idea was about to emerge from relative obscurity, with the same force, one might say, as Dempsey's blows raining down on Carpenter. And while not the cause of the extraordinary radio boom to follow, the Dempsey fight, which had taken so many ears by surprise, was in some sense its herald. While the records are spotty, the number of broadcasting stations jumped from 5 in 1921 to 525 in 1923, and by the end of 1924, over 2 million broadcast-capable radio sets had been sold. Early radio was, before the internet, the greatest open medium of the 20th century, and perhaps the most important example since the early days of newspaper of what an open, unrestricted communications economy looks like. Having begun among some oddballs as a novelty, aimed at bringing one's voice and other sounds to strangers via the airwaves, broadcasting was suddenly in the reach of just about anyone, and very soon all of the ideas as to what shape it should take, from the rather banal to the most utopian, were in contention. So that's it. Part 1 of Radio Dreams, brought to you by Let's Talk Bitcoin, courtesy of The Master Switch by Tim Wu. See you next time.